Epic theater German. Episches Theater is a theatrical movement arising in the early to mid-20th century from the theories and practice of a number of theater practitioners who responded to the political climate of the time through the creation of new political dramas. Epic theater is not meant to refer to the scale or the scope of the work, but rather to the form that it takes. Epic theater emphasizes the audience's perspective and reaction to the piece through a variety of techniques that deliberately cause them to individually engage in a different way. The purpose of epic theater is not to encourage an audience to suspend their disbelief, but rather to force them to see their world as it is. The term, epic theater, comes from Erwin Piscator, who coined it during his first year as director of Berlin's Volksbund 1924-27. 3. Piscator aimed to encourage playwrights to address issues related to contemporary existence. This new subject matter would then be staged by means of documentary effects, audience interaction, and strategies to cultivate an objective response. 4. Epic theater incorporates a mode of acting that utilizes what Brecht calls gestus. One of Brecht's most important aesthetic innovations prioritized function over the sterile dichotomous opposition between form and content. 5. Epic theater in its many forms is a response to Richard Wagner's idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, or total artwork, which intends each piece of art to be composed of other art forms. 6. 7. Since epic theater is so focused on the specific relationship between form and content, these two ideas contradict each other, despite the fact that Brecht was heavily influenced by Wagner. Brecht discussed the priorities and approach of epic theater in his work, A Short Organum for the Theater. 8. Although many of the concepts and practices involved in Brechtian epic theater had been around for years, even centuries, Brecht unified them, developed the approach, and popularized it. Near the end of his career, Brecht preferred the term, dialectical theater, to describe the kind of theater he pioneered. From his later perspective, the term, epic theater, had become too formal a concept to be of use anymore. According to Manfred Weckworth, one of Brecht's directors at the Berliner Ensemble at the time, the term refers to the dialecticizing of events that this approach to theater making produces. 9. Epic theater is distinct from other forms of theater, particularly the early naturalistic approach and later, psychological realism, developed by Konstantin Stanislavski. Like Stanislavski, Brecht disliked the shallow spectacle, manipulative plots, and heightened emotion of melodrama, but where Stanislavski attempted to engender real human behavior in acting through the techniques of Stanislavski's system and to absorb the audience completely in the fictional world of the play, Brecht saw this type of theater as escapist. Brecht's own social and political focus was distinct, too, from surrealism and the theater of cruelty, as developed in the writings and dramaturgy of Antonin Artaud, who sought to affect audiences viscerally, psychologically, physically, and irrationally. While both produced shock in the audience, epic theater practices would also include a subsequent moment of understanding and comprehension. Verfremdungseffekt. Edit. While not invented by Brecht, the Verfremdungseffekt, known in English as the estrangement effect, or the alienation effect, was made popular by Brecht and is one of the most significant characteristics of epic theater. 10. Some of the ways the Verfremdungseffekt can be achieved is by having actors play multiple characters, rearrange the set in full view of the audience, and break the fourth wall by speaking to the audience. The use of a narrator in the Caucasian chalk circle is another example of Verfremdungseffekt at work. 2. Lighting can also be used to emulate the effect. For example, flooding the theater with bright lights, not just the stage, and placing lighting equipment on stage can encourage the audience to fully acknowledge that the production is merely a production instead of reality. As with the principle of dramatic construction involved in the epic form of spoken drama amalgamated or what Brecht calls non-Aristotelian drama, the epic approach to play production utilizes a montage technique of fragmentation, contrast and contradiction, and interruptions. While the French playwright Jean Genet articulates a very different worldview in his dramas from that found in Brecht's, in a letter to the director Roger Blin on the most appropriate approach to staging his The Screens in 1966, he advises an epic approach to its production. Each scene, and each section within a scene, must be perfected and played as rigorously and with as much discipline as if it were a short play, complete in itself. Without any smudges, and without there being the slightest suggestion that another scene, or section within a scene, is to follow those that have gone before. Historicization is also employed in order to draw connections from a historical event to a similar current event. This can be seen in the plays Mother Courage and Her Children and The Good Person of Szechuan, both written by Brecht, which comment on a current social or political issue using historical contexts. 12. Brecht, too, advised treating each element of a play independently, like a music hall turn that is able to stand on its own. Common production techniques in epic theater include a simplified, non-realistic scenic design offset against a selective realism in costuming and props, as well as announcements or visual captions that interrupt and summarize the action. Brecht used comedy to distance his audiences from the depicted events and was heavily influenced by musicals and fairground performers, putting music and song in his plays. Acting in epic theater requires actors to play characters believably without convincing either the audience or themselves that they have become the characters. This is called justice when an actor takes on the physical embodiment of a social commentary. Actors frequently address the audience directly out of character, breaking the fourth wall, and play multiple roles. 12. Brecht thought it was important that the choices the characters made were explicit, and tried to develop a style of acting wherein it was evident that the characters were choosing one action over another. For example, a character could say, "I could have stayed at home, but instead I went to the shops." This he called, fixing the not but element. Eugen Berthold Friedrich Brecht, the 10th of February 1898 to the 14th of August 1956, known professionally as Bertolt Brecht, was a German theater practitioner, playwright, and poet. Coming of age during the Weimar Republic, he had his first successes as a playwright in Munich and moved to Berlin in 1924, where he wrote the Threepenny Opera with Kurt Weill and began a lifelong collaboration with the composer Hans Eisler. Immersed in Marxist thought during this period, he wrote Didactic Lehrstück and became a leading theoretician of epic theater, which he later preferred to call dialectical theater, and the Verfremdungseffekt. The distancing effect, also translated as alienation effect German, Verfremdungseffekt or V-effect, is a concept in performing arts credited to German playwright Bertolt Brecht. Brecht first used the term in his essay, Alienation Effects in Chinese Acting, published in 1936, in which he described it as performing, in such a way that the audience was hindered from simply identifying itself with the characters in the play. Acceptance or rejection of their actions and utterances was meant to take place on a conscious plane, instead of, as hitherto, in the audience's subconscious. The term Verfremdungseffekt is rooted in the Russian formalist notion of the device of making strange, priom-ostranenia, which literary critic Viktor Shklovsky claims is the essence of all art. 2. Lemon and Reese's 1965 English translation 3 of Shklovsky's 1917 coinage as defamiliarization, combined with John Willett's 1964 translation of Brecht's 1935 coinage as alienation effect, and the canonization of both translations in Anglophone literary theory in the decades since, has served to obscure the close connections between the two terms. Not only is the root of both terms strange, stran in Russian, fremd in German, but both terms are unusual in their respective languages. Ostranenie is a neologism in Russian, while Verfremdung is a resuscitation of a long obsolete term in German. In addition, according to some accounts, Shklovsky's Russian friend playwright Sergei Tretyakov taught Shklovsky's term to Brecht during Brecht's visit to Moscow in the spring of 1935. 4. For this reason, many scholars have recently taken to using estrangement to translate both terms, the estrangement device in Shklovsky, the estrangement effect in Brecht. It was in any case not long after returning in the spring of 1935 from Moscow, where he saw a command performance of Beijing opera techniques by Mei Lanfang, that Brecht first used the German term in print 5 to label an approach to theater that discouraged involving the audience in an illusory narrative world and in the emotions of the characters. Brecht thought the audience required an emotional distance to reflect on what was being presented in critical and objective ways, rather than being taken out of themselves as conventional entertainment attempts to do. The proper English translation of Verfremdungseffekt is a matter of controversy. The word is sometimes rendered as defamiliarization effect, estrangement effect, distantiation, alienation effect, or distancing effect. This has caused some confusion for English scholars who confuse the German word Verfremdung with Entfremdung. In Brecht and Method, Frederick Jameson abbreviates Verfremdungseffekt as the V-effect. 6. Many scholars similarly leave the word untranslated. Brecht wanted to distance, or to alienate, his audience from the characters and the action and, by dint of that, render them observers who would not become involved in or to sympathize emotionally or to empathize by identifying individually with the characters psychologically. Rather, he wanted the audience to understand intellectually the characters' dilemmas and the wrongdoing producing these dilemmas exposed in his dramatic plots. By being thus distanced emotionally from the characters and the action on stage, the audience could be able to reach such an intellectual level of understanding or intellectual empathy in theory, while alienated emotionally from the action and the characters, they would be empowered on an intellectual level both to analyze and perhaps even to try to change the world, which was Brecht's social and political goal as a playwright and the driving force behind his dramaturgy. The distancing effect is achieved by the way the artist never acts as if there were a fourth wall besides the three surrounding him. The audience can no longer have the illusion of being the unseen spectator at an event which is really taking place. 7. The use of direct audience address is one way of disrupting stage illusion and generating the distancing effect. In performance, as the performer observes himself, his objective is to appear strange and even surprising to the audience. He achieves this by looking strangely at himself and his work. 8. Whether Brecht intended the distancing effect to refer to the audience or to the actor or to both audience and actor is still controversial among teachers and scholars of epic acting and Brechtian theater. By disclosing and making obvious the manipulative contrivances and fictive qualities of the medium, the actors attempt to alienate the viewer from any passive acceptance and enjoyment of the play as mere entertainment. Instead, the goal is to force viewers into a critical, analytical frame of mind that serves to disabuse them of the notion that what they are watching is necessarily an inviolable, self-contained narrative. This effect of making the familiar strange serves a didactic function insofar as it aims to teach the viewer not to take the style and content for granted, since proponents argue the theatrical medium itself is highly constructed and contingent upon many cultural and economic conditions. It may be noted that Brecht's use of distancing effects in order to prevent audience members from what he characterizes as bathing themselves in empathetic emotions and to draw them into an attitude of critical judgment may lead to other reactions than intellectual coolness. Brecht's popularization of these effects has come to dominate the understanding of its dynamics. But the particulars of a spectator's psyche and of the tension aroused by a specific alienating device may actually increase emotional impact. 9. Audience reactions are rarely uniform, and there are many diverse, sometimes unpredictable, responses that may be achieved through distancing. Actors, directors, and playwrights may draw on alienating effects in creating a production. The playwright may describe them in the script's stage directions, in effect requiring them in the staging of the work. A director may take a script that has not been written to alienate and introduce certain techniques, such as playing dialogue forward to remind the audience that there is no fourth wall, or guiding the cast to act, in quotation marks. The actor, usually with the director's permission, may play scenes with an ironic subtext. These techniques and many more are available for artists in different aspects of the show. For the playwright, reference to vaudeville or musical reviews will often allow rapid segues from empathy to a judgmental attitude through comic distancing. A notable example of such estrangement in an English-language script can be found in Brendan Behan's The Hostage 1958. Brecht's idea of distancing effects has garnered academic interest from a number of researchers in various non-Brechtian performances. Although the term, distancing effect, was first coined by Brecht, the concept has appeared before his usage. Among some notable studies on distancing effects in non-Brechtian performances are Taziya Shiite Ritualistic Passion Play, Mode Nasir et al. 2010 Marathi Theatre Mujumdar, 2013-11 Swang Theatre Ancient Indian Folk Theatre Sharma and Kashyap, 2018 12-Beat Poetry Rissover, 2009-13 Like Thai Folk Theatre Tungtang, 2015-14 and Quranic Narratives Dina, 2014. 15. Rissover's paper discusses the integration of 20 poems which were either excerpted or taken as whole by 9 beat poets into the performance of Edward Albee's The American Dream. While Rissover does not exclusively consider distancing effects of beat poetry as a poetry performance, the paper still demonstrates how beat poetry is able to project distancing effects to the audience. Additionally, Mujumdar's paper 2013 examined the elements of epic drama, which includes distancing effects, in tamasha, a traditional form of Marathi theatre. Mujumdar argues that distancing effects have already been present in tamasha, albeit the concept itself has yet been conceptualized or coined during the 18th century, i.e. the time whereby tamasha was considered as the popular folk arts. Through songs, narratives, dances, music, and commentaries that are embedded within tamasha, the audience is said to be unconsciously performing a social role in achieving the distancing effects advocated by Brecht. 11. Furthermore, Purity's 2015 article emphasized that the extensive use of the Verfremdungseffekt, the V-effect or alienation effect, can be found commonly in Thai Like theater. Even though Like is performed in a way which could be perceived as evoking Brecht's alienation effect, Brechtian acting troupes and Thai Like troupes' approaches are distinctly different. While the goal for Brecht's alienation effect in the Western theater is to make the audience always aware that they are watching a play, and not being taken out of themselves, and thus not being distracted from the main meaning of the story, Thai Like aims to do otherwise.